Hey guys, it's God Bars here, the self-proclaimed hip-hop historian, and this is the 179th episode of my series, where I grab a vinyl from my collection, talk about why I love it, what influence it has, and what its place is in the grand scheme of hip-hop. So here we are once again, returning to the supervillain himself, so I can inch a little bit closer to having all of his classics covered on this page. There are a couple other artists, like LP, Ghostface Killa, or of course Billy Woods, who are personal favorites of mine in this same category, where I've already covered them a good 2 or 3 times already on the channel each, yet still have at least one or more essential albums in their respective discographies to talk about. Today we're doing one that many would probably argue should have been earlier, but when you really lay out how many amazing projects MF Doom released throughout his lifetime, and attempt to rank them, which I actually did recently, I'll link that video in the description, but there's a chance that Operation Doomsday wouldn't crack the top 3 or even top 5, depending on who you ask. But of course that doesn't mean this LP isn't insanely ahead of its time and full of memorable moments. In fact, I think it's one of the better starting places for any aspiring MF Doom listener who isn't quite sure where to start off their journey. It may have a couple avant-garde moments that some fans view as clunky, but personally, I think it's commendable how out there some of the risks he took on his very first solo LP were. Of course, this wasn't the first rap album this giant took part in, as I covered at length in my video for KMD's Mr. Hood. I'm not really going to delve into Doom's role in that group, or his backstory with Onyx the Birthstone Kid and the tragic death of his brother Subrock, as I've already done that a decent amount in my prior uploads for that KMD album, as well as my videos covering Food, Mad Villainy, Born Like This, or Vaudeville Villain. What I will discuss here is how after Subrock's passing and the dismemberment of KMD that followed, Doom, who was then known as Zevlov X, disappeared from the public eye and music scene altogether. And then from around 1994 to 1997, none of the people who were affiliated with Doom had really been able to get in touch with him. One quote I found described his situation as damn near homeless, walking the streets of Manhattan, sleeping on benches. So when he returned in 1999 with a new name, voice, persona, attitude, and even way of rapping, to say it was a surprise would be a vast understatement. This is one of those cases where the artist changed the course of underground hip-hop so drastically with his later work that he can have albums like Operation Doomsday that are extremely enjoyable and overall very solid projects, yet they don't even personally break that top tier of Doom albums just through the sheer amount of quality. Considering how many rappers peak with their very first LP, then spend the rest of their career trying to recreate that, it's pretty awe-inspiring how this dude was able to maintain the utmost lyrical quality with his debut in 1999, or technically 1991, if you mean as an artist in general, even earlier if you count his iconic appearance on Third Base's The Gas Face, going all the way to the year he passed. His voice is noticeably less rich and deep in tone here, when compared to a later release like Mouse and the Mask, and his lyricism isn't quite as dense and heady as it would become in the later years, but that's hardly a dent in this classic's armor when you realize how much more technically advanced Operation Doomsday is than a good chunk of 1999 releases. And make no mistake, it isn't as if that year was so void of substance that this album just defaults to being the best. There's dozens of classics in 1999, some I would even argue end up a bit better than Doomsday. However, what's much harder to argue is that any of them were doing what Doom was both technically and lyrically. Some of the big releases from the last year before the turn of the century, outside of Doomsday obviously, are Eminem's The Slim Shady LP, Dr. Dre's 2001, Mos Def or Yasin Bey's Black on Both Sides, The Roots with Things Fall Apart, Pharaoh Monch's Internal Affairs, Prince Paul's Prince Among Thieves, Method Man and Redman's Blackout, Loot Pack's debut, Sound Pieces to Antidote, the first Handsome Boy Modeling School album, Mobb Deep's Murder Music, Inspector Deck's Uncontrolled Substance, Peanut Butter Wolf's My Vinyl Weighs a Ton, Hove's Volume 3, The Life and Times of Sean Carter, and of course ODB's classic sophomore album. And that's still just a very small chunk. But I'm not sure if even the most experimental pick from all of those killer releases can even come near the territory that this album touches. There's one MF Grimm featuring track that not only takes a massive risk by sampling Glass Onion off the Beatles' White album, but they change the BPM and tempo multiple times within this one song, and it's definitely one of the more warped and twisted flips Doom's ever put together. The villain still had his coded and at times kind of abstract references, and while there were certain improvements to be made, it's undeniable that every aspect we would come to know Doom for down the line is displayed on Doomsday in spades, be it the Metal Fingers instrumentals, with their dialogue heavy, aesthetic building skits, or his tendency to go against the grain by actually featuring himself on here under one of his other monikers, King Ghidorah, but it's listed as King Ghidra, which is probably because this character was still being workshopped at the time, which in my opinion just goes to show how far this dude thought ahead, as it's pretty ingenious for him to introduce this alter ego during his debut LP, that way when it came time to drop Take Me to Your Leader a few years down the line, he had already established the character in this MF Doom cinematic universe. But Operation Doomsday is really the album where the comic book theme gets introduced, and it was pretty ahead of its time, especially when you consider it dropped a whole year before Ghostface Killah and RZA would incorporate some similar ideas and themes into Supreme Clientele. To be fair, they'd already done that to a degree on Iron Man and some of the other early Wu releases, but MF Doom was a massive part in making fans realize that a superhero or supervillain themed rapper isn't as corny or nerdy as it may seem in concept. I'm sure plenty of people had thrown the nerd rap term at MF Doom at this time, considering that was a treatment a lot of his friends and collaborators were being given. Guys like Company Flow, Aesop Rock, Eden, and MC Paul Barman were. Honestly, in retrospect, it seems like the entire Raucous Records, Lyricist Lounge, and even anti-con artists like Cloud Dead or Soul that were from a completely different label and scene got treated as if they were all the exact same thing and were against real, true blue hip hop or something. Luckily, it seems like the further we get into the future, the more people realize how misplaced their judgment was. And even rappers who put down the scene when it was going on virtually never have anything bad to say about MF Doom. I feel like you could make a good argument that Doom was one of the biggest pieces of bridging this gap between the underground with more contemporary rappers, considering he's basically the definition of your favorite rapper's favorite rapper. The amount of memorable and frankly iconic Doom beats and bars that show up here are staggering, but I wanted to share some of what's probably my favorite verse on here, which comes on the massive Posse cut, which is about halfway through the track list. This instrumental is legendary, and there's a good reason Doom reimagined it on the collab album he did with Masta Ace, which I believe dropped in the early 2010s. But the best part when it comes to this monster of a track is when the villain starts rhyming, taking his King Ghidra form to give us a verse full of quotable lines, beginning with, "Flew in from Monster Island just to rag shit with jet lag, with brothers specializing ways how us not to get bagged. Egads, I bring confusion like roll call to MCs, so-called hoes be like, yup, I told y'all. So socialize my bio, so I dip dive, memorize like I Omega zip drive. Go to the bar to drink, to get soberer, King Ghidra eat the head of a king cobra like Ginkgoba." It was hard to narrow down just one other MF Doom verse to share off this thing, but I decided to go with the starting lines from the very last song on here. Unless you count the epilogue, that is, but that one's kind of more of a skit than it is a song with actual lines to read. In terms of the last instrumental with any rapping going on, that would be the boldly titled question mark, where Dumoulin says, "He cleans his metal mask with gasoline, they after him last seen, pulling chicks like a fiend, pull a fast one. Can't put shit past him, got people on his own team mad enough to blast him. Slow in real life, on the mic Rain Man. Stand close to his main man like a chain gang. Who give a fuck about who or they fancy crew? That's no mystery that Hardy Boys do with Nancy Drew. Sorta with her drawers down quarter, the extorter brings slaughter like, well, I oughta. I suggest you hand over the formula, doula, a villain in your land, in his land a ruler. Hard hitting like puffing a woola with Lieutenant Uhura. Every day feels like it's an off day with Ferris Bueller. Brother pull heat to prove they not sweet. No matter how you spell it, we still got beats. As I mentioned earlier, all the production on here is handled by Metal Fingers himself alone, but the feature side is much more plentiful, giving us guest appearances from names like Pebbles the Invisible Girl, DJ Cucumber Slice, Tommy Gun, MF Grimm, King Ghidra, X-Ray, Rodin, Megalon, KD, Kong, E. Mason, and Curious. When it comes down to honorable mentions on this classic, I'd probably go with rhymes like Dimes, Gastrolls, The Finest, Red and Gold, Operation Greenbacks, Dead Bent, Go with the Flow, Hey, and Tick Tick. For my top 3 overall favorite tracks, I think I'd choose Doomsday, Who You Think I Am, and Question Mark. Thank you for watching my 179th video. We have one more classic left for this set of 90s albums, and I definitely saved the best for last this time around. So check for that upload, and if you enjoyed, be sure to like, subscribe, and let me know what moments you return to the most off Doom's legendary solo debut here. Don't forget to have a great day, and I'll see you next time, okay? Alright.
Who would do such a thing? Look, I stand in the flame of a feeling we call pain. Father's Day mug, little hand shaped of clay. Carrier planes flew overhead in pockets.